title, but God intended for good. God intended for good. And Joseph here in Genesis 50:20, he's talking to his brother who caused tremendous pain in his life. And this is what he tells his brother. You intended to harm me, but God intended all for good. And God's people said. You know, in a world, in this fallen world, it's filled with pain. Pain is all around us. And because of that, you and I can't hide or run away from it. There are different pains. There's physical pain, there's emotional pain, mental, relational pain. There's pain from family. There's pain from friends. There's pain from church members. There's pain when you're being spiritually attacked. There's even pain from growing spiritually. Did you know that? Because to learn spiritual discipline, God puts you in what I call a spiritual gym. You know, when you lift to build your physical muscle, it's painful because you have to lift some heavy stuff. And so to develop a spiritual discipline, God puts you in a spiritual gym, and there's pain from building spiritual muscles. Right? Sometimes even truth can be painful. You know, the Lord shines His light on your blind spots. And when you realize you've been going the wrong direction, and true repentance happens when you feel the pain. Okay? When you feel the pain. You need to let God in. Okay? Tell your neighbor, let God in. The devil wants to use your pain to hinder you. God uses pain to transform you. When you let God touch your pain, pain does not hinder you. One thing, I see God does with pain. One thing that He does. Pain becomes, when you feel the pain, it's like a warning light that something is wrong. Something is wrong inside. And pain becomes a blessing in disguise. What am I talking about? Fever. When you have a fever, nobody likes to have a fever, but it's very important. It is painful. When you have a fever, some people get chills. Some people start shivering. Some people sweat. You lose your appetite. There's headache. For me, when I have a fever, I have ache all over my body. Right? There's ache all over my body. And it's painful. But it is a warning. That fever is warning you of an infection that needs to be dealt with. Right? It's important. And so Rick Warren says this about pain. And I agree with him. I see that in my own life, what God does with pain in my own life. There's no growth if there's no change. Right? There's no change if there's no loss. And there's no loss if there is no pain. Okay? No pain. So in Genesis chapter 50, Joseph speaks to his brother who caused so much pain in his life. You intended to harm me, but God intended all for good. Okay? Joseph is telling his brother, when I was young, you rejected me, you abandoned me, you abused me. But over many years, what he's telling his brother is, God draws near to me in my pain and use my pain to transform me. But God intended all for good. God used my pain to make me a leader. God used pain to refine my character. God used pain to teach me how to forgive. God used pain so that I would depend on him more. God used pain. And if you read the book of Genesis, what happened is God used pain so that Joseph was ready, and God used him to save millions of people from starvation. There was a great famine for many years, and God used Joseph to save millions of people from starvation. And God also used pain to save his family from starvation. So 40 years before, what happened? Okay. He went through all kinds of injustice. He was abused and abandoned from family. He faced great injustice. He was falsely accused of rape. He was wrongfully put in prison, and he was painfully mistreated year after year after year. And in those years, God was healing him, guiding him, growing him in the midst of pain. Not without pain. I wish it could be done without pain. But God did this in the midst of pain. And what was God doing? God was getting Joseph ready for greatness. Greatness. By using his pain. Joseph overcame his greatest pain with God's help. Joseph overcame his past pain with his family, with past pain as a slave in Potiphar's house, past pain of falsely being put in prison. And how do I know that Joseph overcame with God? Because when you read Genesis 39, when he was a slave in Potiphar's house, and when he was in prison as a prisoner, you know what it says? 4 times in that chapter, the Lord was with Joseph, verse 2. His master, the Potiphar, saw that the Lord was with Joseph, verse 3. While Joseph was in prison, the Lord was with him, verse 21. The Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did, verse 23. Now, Joseph, he made a choice. Joseph invited God into his pain. And I believe this is the reason Joseph was able to forgive his brothers. His brothers, 40 years before, when Joseph was, like a boy, was jealous of him. His brothers rejected, abused, and abandoned him. His brothers beat him up, threw him in a ditch, and sold him into slavery, and then lied to his father that Joseph was killed by some ferocious animal. And over the many years, Joseph, by God's divine plan of God, became the second most powerful person in the most powerful nation, Egypt, at that time. And it is then, because there's this famine, and only Egypt had food. So the surrounding nation will come to Egypt to buy food. And one day, he sees his brothers asking for food, to buy food. He was the second most powerful person in Egypt. Joseph could have had them be tortured easily. He had that power. He could have put his brothers in prison for the rest of their lives. He even had the power to have them killed. But instead, Joseph cried when he saw them. And when they were so scared when he was revealed, Joseph forgave them. Why? God touched and was with Joseph in his greatest pain. This gave him the heart to forgive his brothers who abused him. It prepared him to save his family from this great famine. But not just his family, he saved millions of people from starvation. But biblically, there was a greater thing that Joseph did. Because Joseph saved his family, one of his brothers who also abused him, his name was Judah, okay, that was saved from starvation. And if you know the Bible, Judah is the person when you go through the generational line, eventually Jesus will be born in that line. Jesus, who will redeem the whole world. Now, okay, so what do we see? Joseph's there was rejection, abandonment, abuse, betrayal, and it was overwhelmingly painful for Joseph. Okay? Joseph invited God to touch his pain, and God redeemed Joseph's pain. What I believe God is saying to you and me, don't go on this journey of pain alone. You know, pain is like a fire. Okay? Think about fire. In the devil's hand, if you listen to the devil, you know what he will do with your pain? He will destroy everything around you. Fire could do that. Could destroy everything. You will get burned. People around you will get burned. Okay, that's what the devil will do with pain. In God's hand, it can be a fire that refines you. See, God sees you as this precious metal, very precious. And God puts you in that fire. It's painful, fire, but all the impurities melt away in that refining fire. In your pain, let God in. You know, in your heart, that is how I look at my heart. There's the rooms in your heart. And some of the rooms are filled with pain and sorrow. Rooms, there's rejection, abandonment, and abuse. Some rooms, there's shame, condemnation, accusation. There's fear, there's chaos, there's confusion, there's brokenness, there's bondage. And it is in this context, right, Jesus personally comes to you, and I believe it's in this context, Jesus says, Revelations chapter 3, verse 20. Revelations chapter 3, verse 20. And you got to understand, a lot of people use this in evangelism for salvation. No. Okay. In the context, he's speaking to the church. And he's knocking. But he's knocking in the door to your heart where there's a lot of pain. And he says this, here I am. I stand at the door and I knock. See, when you are in pain, you got to be gentle. He doesn't say, I'm going to break down the door. He's knocking. Okay? And he's waiting for you. Because if you're in pain, you need gentleness. You need a lot of love. If anyone hears my voice, and he's waiting for you to open the door. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, can you imagine? This is what God's saying. Now, I come in my holiness. Obey everything I say. Jesus is humbling himself. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with you, and they with me. The Lord Jesus is knocking on the door of your heart. Jesus says, I will come in and eat with that person, not give you law, right? 100 things that you shouldn't do and 100 things that you shouldn't do. He doesn't come to condemn and accuse you. He doesn't point out all the things that's wrong with that room. He says he will eat with you. Another word, another translation, he'll break bread with you. And back then, if you say he'll break bread, let's break bread together, you know what it means? Hey, let's have a relationship. Let's talk. I talk to you, you talk to me, I listen. Let's talk about fellowship. It's talking about Jesus saying, I want to be your friend. Let's break bread together. He's saying, there are people, it's a broken world. There are people that will reject you. Jesus says, I'm going to come in and I'm going to love you. There are those who will abandon you or who abandoned you. Jesus comes into the room and says, I will never abandon you. I will never forsake you. There are those who abused you. Jesus comes into the room and he says, I'm going to be patient with you. I'm going to heal you. And I'm going to redeem you. Jesus is knocking. I want to encourage you. Open the door. Where there's pain, let Jesus in. Because your identity is not the pain. It's not the rejection. It's not the abandonment. Your identity is in Jesus Christ. Now, worship team, if you come up.